comprehension, what it's all about. And even the most rabid decoder would agree that this is why we read. There's no debate about that. Comprehension, though, does depend on the other 5 being in place. If a child's having trouble with comprehension, it may well be a purely comprehending problem, but you always have to consider the possibility that one of those previous 5 critical components is not in place. So you always do need to check that. But let's just focus on comprehension. One of the most important things to remember is that it needs to be taught, and a lot of teachers think that when they hand out a worksheet with perhaps a few paragraphs on it and some questions at the end that might have some straight knowledge questions and a range of levels of questions and some inferential questions, and ask the children to complete that, that is not teaching comprehension, that is testing comprehension. And comprehension, like all of the other elements of the Big Six, does need to be taught explicitly. So there's a range of ways of doing this, many ways, and there's a lot of resources. But in the time that I've got here, I'd just like to divide them into some strategies that you can do beforehand, during and after. When you're addressing a piece of text, introducing it with the children, orienting the text to them is obviously important. Finding out what they already know so that it can build on their previous knowledge, allow them to set up a framework for approaching it. If there's any new vocabulary, it's very important to talk about that before they read it, to explore those new meanings. So there are things that you do beforehand that can help the child approach it the way a good reader approaches a piece of material. You know why you're reading it generally. You know if you're going to be scanning it for a quick piece of information. You know if you're following a complicated recipe, in which case you might have to read it much more carefully. If you're reading this material to help you prepare for an essay, you're going to have to read it in a very different way than if you're reading it just to find the date of something because somebody asked you that question. So good readers need to know that, and so understanding the purpose of reading and having a discussion about that before is also quite important. So all of those things are things that you can do before approaching the text. During the text, while children are reading, we have to find interesting and engaging ways to get them to interact with the text. If there's a big idea about comprehension, it's that we have to find ways of getting kids to do something with it, to really engage with it. And often this actually requires something quite physical. Something that I really like to use and that children often like to use are the short little post-it notes, the little narrow ones that have room for maybe a few words or a symbol. And if in a piece of text you give each child perhaps half a dozen or 10 of these, and say, as you go through this text, I want you to use those little post-it notes to identify parts of the text that you want to discuss with us later. So if something really surprises you, you might put on one of your little post-it notes an exclamation mark and pop it on the text where that point was. If something raises a question in your mind, you might actually write the question and just put that on the little post-it note and put that on the text. If this reminds you of something that has happened to you, reminds you of something that you've read somewhere else, you might actually put a little R on that little post-it note and put it somewhere else, because afterwards we're going to really be talking about this. Now, little boys really like this, little girls really like this too. And actually older boys and girls quite like this too. It gives them something physical to do, and it makes sure that they are actually monitoring what they're reading. Good readers monitor what they're reading. Another thing you can do is say to them beforehand, you're going to come across this particular word, and I want you to find out, or want you to think about in the way it's used, what information around it helps you understand what that word means. So you focus this children's attention on something that they're going to be reading. Give them a task to do while they're reading so that they won't just keep going. these are ways that you can get them to actually interact with it. You might have some sort of graphic organiser that you want them to fill out as you go along. So you give them a structure. It might be a skeletal diagram with main idea in the first heading, main idea in the second paragraph, And these are ways that you can get them to fill out something as they're going through the text. And afterwards, at the end of it, you need to help children who are struggling with reading frame that and organise that in a way that will help them remember it, which often means doing a little summary of the key ideas. It might be using some kind of graphic organiser, a pyramid, main idea, next level of ideas, a few bits of detail. Help them do that. Good readers can do this automatically in their head. You have to do this for poor readers. You have to have that pyramid up on the blackboard and perhaps fill it in a modelling exercise. A really important thing to do as you read through material is to think aloud what you're thinking about, to model to the children as you read along. I wonder what that means. I better go back and read that again. Or that reminds me of, or I didn't know that before. You have to model that kind of thing very explicitly for children to show them the workings of a good reader's brain. Let them into the secrets of learning. Let them into the secrets of reading for meaning, which is, of course, what it's all about. It's one of the great pleasures of life, and it just saddens me that some children will never want to curl up with a big fat book. But we can certainly get all children, or most children, to a point of being functional readers so that they can participate as literate citizens in this world. It's a life skill, and we need to develop these skills of deep comprehension so that they can participate fully in society.